And okay, last week we introduced Node server or Node.js server. So it's based on JavaScript. It can do lots of things. The main difference and between that and the JavaScript you have in the browser is it does not have a browser. So it can be used as a server. And today we're going to cover or introduce Express.js. It's a package kind of built on top of Node, and it simplified Node itself, but also provide lots of functions, and that we'll need later on to build the backend for our app. In other words, we're going to be using Express.js quite a lot in the second coursework, and obviously, we'll explain what is middleware in the sense what Express is and how to use it. Okay, I'm going to start with what Express.js is. So it's a framework which is built on top of Node.js. So it's just like one of the third-party libraries or modules you have in Node. The way to install is the same as you install other modules we introduced last week. And so it's built on top of Node, so you would see lots of things. Okay, and one of the main reason to use Express is to make it easier to organize your functionality and with middleware and routing. Obviously, we'll explain what those are in this lecture and in the probably following lecture as well. But the general idea is just to break down uh, your code into smaller files and make it much more easier to manage. If you're not using Express or if you just only use Node, you have to put everything inside one big function, which is usually not a good practice for good software. Okay, and it also adds helpful utilities to add to the Node's HTTP package or module or object. So, and as we mentioned the last week, the HTTP is a built-in module of Node. So it comes with Node. Once you install Node, it has that. We did a simple example of running HTTP server using its HTTP module. But in the simple case, it's fine. In the more complex case, such as what we need to build as a backend for our app, using just the building HTTP module becomes a little bit cumbersome in the sense we have to write much more code. And whereas using the Express, it can reduce the number of code you need to write. Okay, and it also can facilitate the rendering of dynamic HTML views. And this is something we'll cover later. So using Express, it's possible to generate page dynamically on the server. But in our case, we're probably going to do this on the client side in the sense we're using Express to send data to the client side, which is what you have built, and then render the page there instead on the server. Again, we'll cover these a little bit later on. Okay, and just a quicker review of in terms of the relationship between middleware and the server, which is the node. So this is what we already introduced in I think last week. You have the front end, which is the view, and all this part is the backend. The backend including both the server and database. So we haven't talked about database yet. That will be the last part before the second coursework. We're currently mainly focused on the server part. So middleware, in terms of Express, is built on top of Node.js. So it's essentially just an external module for Node. As I mentioned, it makes it a bit easier to using the HTTP server. So it still needs Node to run. Node and Express cannot run by itself. And then it's abstract away some complexity, again, just to make the coding a little bit easier to write. Okay, and the other thing we also mentioned is it allows you to refactor the big request handler function into smaller handlers, a group or a set of handlers, and make it easier to maintain and write your code. Again, we're going to see some examples later on. Okay, and then so Express mostly provides these four things, and the thing called middleware routing, sub-applications, which is also called the router, and finally convenience. The things means you can save you from writing code. Okay, we're going to explain what these are briefly now, and then later on we're going to go into much more details about middleware this week and the routing next week. So these are the two mostly useful for the coursework. We won't cover too much in terms of router and convenience, just to say use them when we come to that. Okay, and as I mentioned, if you use the default HTTP server comes with a node, you can only have one request handler function, and you have to put everything inside that. And as the app becomes more complex, and the function get too big, so this is where the middleware comes in, which try to break down different things you need to do in the request handler into smaller pieces like individual functions. Okay, and these smaller request handler are called middleware function or just the middleware. Okay, so each individual middleware, they can do different tasks. And for example, they can logging requests, and in the sense, just log whatever the request you send to the server, to sending static files. So static files means, for example, HTML, CSS files that you need to for your app. You can use the middleware to send them back to this user. Okay, and so next one is very important in the sense it's just the way how middleware works and which makes it different from routing. So the middleware runs in sequences. So when you finish one middleware function, it will go on to the next, and then goes on to the next, and so on. Whereas routing is conditional, kind of like a branching fashion. Okay, and so this is a simple example and of a sequence of middleware and how that would run. And so this will be 1, 2, and 3 middlewares, and they run in sequence. So this sequence or the order of the sequence is decided by how the order they appear in the code. So the one appear first in the code will be the first middleware, and the second appear in the code will be second middleware, etc., etc. Okay, and then so in this case, the first middleware is called a logging software. So that will happen whenever a request comes in. So it always goes to the logging middleware first. And once that's complete, it goes to the next middleware, which in this case is authorization. So this is where you check the username and password to see if the user is an authorized person to access the information. So that will be the second. And then once we get to the authorization software, there are two possibilities. One possibility is the user is authorized. So it goes on to the third middleware. So could be sending the static files back to the user or any other data user required once it's authorized. Or it can potentially say the request handling will stop at the authorization middleware part because the person is actually not authorized. So it will send a response to the user and stop the response there.
Sorry, Kai. What does
Yeah.
it mean by authorized? Like what sort of authorization?
So authorization just to say checking the username password.
Oh, okay, okay. Like no, okay, like logging in and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, log in. So in the request, the user would send its username and password. The authorization middleware will check with, say, the record, for example, in the database, are they match, and then decide whether to send back the data request or just say logging errors or message. Okay, and so this is kind of just hopefully to give you a kind of idea of how middleware works. We're going to cover more in the code examples later in this lecture. So as I mentioned, there are four things that Express does. The second one is routing. Okay, and it's similar to middleware in the sense it also allows you to break a big request handler into smaller pieces. But the difference is, these requests are executed conditionally, and depending on the URL and the HTTP method a client sends. So basically that means, and how do I say this? So it's definitely not sequentially, and depending on the URL and HTTP method. So say the URL that people request, or is that the home page or the login page or the contact us page, and it will provide different response. And then there's also HTTP method. So sometimes user can just request to get information, so the get method. And then sometimes the user might request to save information. For example, after you register user, you want to save the username and password, and there will be a different HTTP method. And depends on the method, you will have different responses as well. Okay, and so here is a difference in terms of the URL. So let's say your app has a home page and a guest book page, and when the user try to use entering the URL for the home page, maybe called slash and homepage.html, and Express will send back the home page, and similarly, if you request the URL of the guest book, so maybe slash guestbook.html, and then it would send back the HTML file for the guestbook. So that's a simple example of routing. So we'll see more examples in the lecture next week. Okay, and so that's the second thing. And so the third thing that Express can do or can be useful is called sub applications or routers. Okay, so it can be slightly confusing, but it does have some similarity to the routing. So what it allows you to define routers can be used to break up large applications. Again, the purpose is to break up large code. And the smaller pieces can be different parts. And for example, if you look at this example, this is your Express applications, and then you might have three very different parts. So there's one, which is administration panel. That means only people had admin access to the app can access this. So normal user will not be see any of these. And there's also the API router. So this is the part when you interact with applications through code. So basically, these are not for user to see, but for the code to contact. And then there's part, the single page application, which is actually the page or the app that users see that will be displayed in the browser. So these three are very different. So this is one for admin user. This is for code, not for any user. And this is for the user actually seeing the app. So these can be break up or set up as different routers or sub-applications, and which can further be divided, has its own, say, middleware and routing. Okay, so this is usually not necessary until you have fairly complex app. In this case, so you have this app which not only has the page which user would see, but also administration interface and also an API, open API that people can contact. In our case, we probably only just build the part that the client will see on the browser. In a sense, we don't quite need to use router yet. Okay, so now we come back and to start from the very beginning in terms of how do you actually install Express. And so all you need to install is to say npm install Express and -- save. So we already talked about this last week. So npm install allows you to install any external node modules. And so that's the name of the module, just called Express. So very easy to remember. And finally, the -- save, which allows you to save that information into your package.json file. So after that, you should see something like this added to your package.json file. It says now one of the dependency is Express and would have a version as well, depends on the version that you downloaded. So here it says 5, but I think currently by default, it will download the latest one, which is kind of like 4.17 or something. Okay, as I said, and run this command will download the latest version of Express. And if you want to install a particular version of Express, you can also include that in your command. But that's not needed for the purpose of this module. Okay. Again, just as any other third-party modules, the actual file would be put in a folder called node underscore modules together with everything needed, like a dependency of Express. And if Express needs other modules to run. Yep, we already mentioned. So this dash dash save would add this information to your package.json. Okay, I'm gonna just demonstrate it now. So that's annoying. And let me just demo npm modules. Okay, that's already there. Okay, let's say this is the folder that I want to create my Express project. So first I need to install Express, and you can see that's the folder. It's called demo. And if I do a ls, which means list all the files in the folder, currently it's empty. Okay, so first you need to create a new Node.js project. And you can either manually creating the package.json file, as we discussed, or here you can just say initialize a new. Okay, and so here I'm using the automatic way, which just says npm init, which initialize a new node project, and it will ask you a few questions. This will be default value. If you just press enter, then it will accept the default value. So I'm just using default value here now. Okay, and so I'm gonna just skip all of this. And now if I look at my file list again, now I have this values and list of, sorry, this file create for me, and I can display the information in there, which is these. So it shows the name, the version, description, etc., etc. So that's now we can start installing. We just need to run this command. As I mentioned, npm is the code, is like the tools we need to use, and that's the install is an npm command to install third-party modules, and followed by the name of the module. In this case, will be Express. And finally, I want to save this and to my package.json file. So I just type this, and you will see something like this. That means it's downloading files from the internet that's needed for this module. Okay, it says that's being added, and that's the version, which is 4.7.1. And you can see it's actually added 50 packages from 37 contributors, etc., etc. So while even I only asked for one module or package, it actually installed 50 because it Express itself relies on other packages, and these packages has its own dependencies. So in total, 50 is installed. And if we have a look now, maybe clear this way. So we have a new directory now called node module. And then this file is again also automatically created when installing the Express. And this is the package.json file we saw a little bit later on. Now, if we display the information in package.json, now you can see now this is added. So it added a dependency, which is Express, and with the versions as well. And if we have a look of the node package directory, our node modules directory. So this is the folders where actual files are stored. So all the files needed for Express are stored. And you can see there are actually lots of things there. And let me see, yeah, certainly there's Express, which is this one, but everything else are the other modules that Express relied on. And when you install Express, they all get installed. So the node modules directory can get large very quickly because of this. So you can imagine if you install, say, even just 2 or 3 external modules, you might end up with, say, hundreds of different modules here. So that's why when you're actually submitting your work, do not including the node modules subdirectory in your submission. So this applies to both and say submitting on the module page or even upload your code to the GitHub, because these files are not needed to run and they can be loaded and installed so long as you have the package.json file, and you can quickly install all the dependencies just by running npm install without anything, and it will install everything which is described in dependency and their dependencies, etc. Okay, and then next, we just create a very simple and hello world example of Express. And in this case, all it does is creating an HTTP server, and then for any request, it will log that onto the console and then send a response to say hello world, and which is the same response as we did for the using the node HTTP module last week. But in this case, we are using the Express to achieve exactly the same thing. Okay, and we're going to do that very quickly. Okay, and so this is the Visual Studio code, and I'm opened in the same folder where I installed the npm. So you can see this was the exact files. We just had a look, which had Express installed. Okay, again, to do this, we need to create a JavaScript file and put these in. So we're going to do one now. Let's call it server.js. And then first we need to request all the packages we need. And so we need to require, oh, okay. And so now I load the Express, require the Express package and refer to it in a variable called Express. And in this case, we can also use the HTTP module from the node itself. And later on, you will see the examples where you actually don't need the HTTP module at all. You can do everything Express. But for now, we're still using that in this example. Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
the variable name which is like Express and and the text which you have written in the require, it has to be same.
Sorry.
The variable name which is Express, the first Express, has
Yeah.
to be the same as the second one.
Okay. So the question is, say the variable name here, and does it have to be the same as the package name?
Exactly.
Yeah. So the answer is no. And you can call this whatever you want. You can call it E or EX or anything, but it's like a convention. It's you just call it the same name because it's much easier to recognize later on. Because later on you will not be using Express this way. You are using the variable all the time, and just by giving the same name as the module name, and to make it easier to recognize.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and then next is just to, now I required, basically that means I loaded the package, I can use it. And then I have to actually start it. And the starter is just run Express itself as a function. That's all it is. Now you actually started the instance of Express. This time it's referred to as an app. Again, this name, you can choose any names you want. And of course, you can't call it Express because that's already used. But that's all you need to actually start an instance of Express. Okay, and next we're going to do here. So this will be the first examples of the middleware we talked before. So this will be handling any incoming request. When the request come in, it will pass through this first. Okay, and in terms of what it does, it's the same as before. So it console log the request onto the console. This is on the server side, and then send a response back, which says "Hello world." Okay, we're gonna do app.use. So app refers to this instance of Express, and .use is the way to create middleware. Okay, this is a bit annoying, go away. And in terms of actual use, you need a function, and it will have a request object, and then a response object. So the actual code will be inside this function. Okay, and what you call the actual name here, again, is not important, but the first object always will have the information, or the object contains information that about the user request, for example, the URL, the method, and the response is where you save the response that you want to send back. So for example, what we do here is just to display the request itself. The request is request dot, I think dot URL. Yeah, request dot URL. So what that does is it displays the URL of the incoming request. There's other information which is not shown here. And then in terms of response, sorry, wrong here. This should be request, not require. And then maybe I'll have hello from the Express.js server. So in this case, and doesn't really matter what the incoming URL is, it will just send back the same text message, similar to what we did before. Okay, and the only thing we want to mention is, and this end will create the response and end the request handling. Then the response is going to be sent back. Okay, and then finally, we're going to actually creating the server and start it. So we're going to using.
Where do you get the URL from? It's from the module HTTP module. Request.url.
Yeah. So this one actually comes from an app.use. So that's part of the Express, or it actually applies to all the how do I say, all Node.js functions and request handler functions. If you remember last week, and when we create a Node.js HTTP server, it also has these request and response objects.
Yeah, but no, I just mean that the URL. Where do you get the request?
Okay. Yeah. So the request is an object. It has lots of properties inside, and the URL is one of the property. And these are all predefined. So if you just you can use different names, or say the get.method or something.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just a predefined field. That's all. And the .url is one of the field which give you the URL of the incoming request.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and then we come back here. We actually creating the server now. Here we're still using the HTTP module from the Node.js, and it's possible to do this with just Express. And we're going to do that later. Here, I'm going to be putting the app. Okay, so basically putting this one here with Express. So this just basically means I'm going to using the Express as my request handler. And then finally, listen on a port number 3000. So this will actually start the server. Okay. So it doesn't do anything particularly interesting. It just sends a hello from the Express server message back to all the requests. Okay, and to run it, and you run node app.js, and it will run, and then you can open it up, open up a browser and try to send a request to the server and get the response. Okay, so I'm going to just do that now. Yeah, and so in this case, we call this one server.js. To start, I just type server, try node. Ooh. Node server.js. Okay, and now we didn't see anything because, and when we started the server, we didn't display any message or anything, so you will not see anything here. And now if I go back to my browser, and if I type in localhost 3000, and because this says 3000, enter, you can see the message. It says hello from the express.js server, but also you can see have the information here. Say this request URL is, and the root, which is a slash, means I didn't request anything except just typing the domain name. And also there's this one here, which is something additional just done by the Chrome by default. It will try to get the favicon icon, which essentially is this little picture shown here. If there's any, it will show shown up here. The other thing I can potentially do is I can do, say, I don't know, if I'm adding something, say I'm now adding directory path and file name. And you can see now here, the request has this, but in terms of response, it's still the same. That's how we just programmed so far. Okay. Let's back to the actual slides now. Okay, and so this is not that different and from what we did last week. And last week we had this HTTP server, which is using only the node. And you can see there we had this request handler function, which is very similar to the middleware we created here, where I use app.use to create this. And previously we just used the request.handler and do very similar things here. Okay, and then, so as I already mentioned, if you're using the HTTP or Node module from the node only, you can only have one request handler function. And everything you need to do in terms of handling requests has to be inside that function. Okay, so this is how this means. And you have the request coming from the server side, sorry, from the client, and you have this big request handler function, and you send the response at the end after you finish your request function. And with middleware, you can do this. So the request coming, it goes to an array of request handlers. So in this case, you can have 3 or even more, and these will be executed in sequence. And when all that handlers or the old middleware finished, the response will be sent back to the user. So this is examples we saw before, and you have the request coming, and you have 1, 2, and 3 different middleware. And then, so the first one do the logging, the second one do the checking, username, password, logging, and finally, depends on the result of this one, you either send something back, which is done by the third middleware, or just stop at the second step when the user is not authorized to get the information. So using Node.js only, you have to put all these code inside one function, and with the middleware, you can split them into 3 parts, make it easier. And also, more importantly, is this also allows you to reuse these different middlewares. For example, if you do logging, and it can be used in this app, but also it can be used in different apps, because most likely the code here is independent of what you want to do, it displays something. And in some cases, the authorization part can also be reused quite easily. And if you put everything in one big function, then it will be much harder to reuse unless it's exactly the same, which is not always the case. Okay, and then there's 2 types of middleware. This first type of middleware is something that doesn't change any response. So for example, the log as we did is a passive middleware, which displays something on the log, on the console, and it doesn't do anything to the response. Okay, so this is essentially what we did. So just this one here, very similar to what we did there. It does a console log, and it's displayed the URL of the incoming request, and that's all. It does not do anything to the response itself. Okay, so this is the so-called passive middleware, and it still be useful in this case, for example, for debugging, or just to provide information to see the server is it running properly. Okay, and there's also possibility, or actually many of the middleware, which would actually change the response. Okay, and for example, the authentication middleware or the login password middleware, it will change the response. For example, if it's not authorized, it will send back an error message, say not authorized. Okay, so in that sense, you change the response object. For example, you first set the code and including some text message. So this is the non-passive middleware. Okay, so we're going to see some examples later on. We're not going to repeat this example here just because we're running out of time. And if you're interested here, it does some random things in the sense it just pick a random, depends on the time, and divided by 2. If it's equal to 0, you're authorized. If it's not 0, and you're not authorized. Okay, as I already mentioned, for each of these request handler functions, okay, so this is still the node. You have these 2 JavaScript objects. One is called request, the other is called response. So it is not what's the name important, it is the position important. So the first argument is always the request object, and the second argument is always the response object. So for example, you can simplify, it's further shorter the name from request to just REQ, and then shorten the name from response to RES. But still, they will contain the same information, just different variable name. Okay. And then once you can use this in your code, in the sense you can get information about the request by using the first object, for example, the URL, and you modify the second object to say add message to send back, or do other things, for example, sending back the static files, which we'll cover a little bit later on. Okay, and then it is the same and for middleware, except the middleware has a third thing called next. Okay, and as I mentioned before, sorry. So for each middleware, it's still a function, but it takes three of them arguments. The first two are the request and the response. It's the same as before, so it works exactly the same way as you do here, the request. And the main difference is now it has a next function, which basically just to ask or pass, just finish this function and starting running the next middleware in the queue. So because in the node, you only has one request handler function, so you don't need next because there's always no next, there's only one. Whereas in the middleware, you need the next when there is more middleware in the queue. Or if you are the last middleware, then you don't need a next function anymore because you know that's the last one, it will always finish there. So when the next is called, and the express will go to the next function in the middleware stack. So that basically means, let me, okay, we're gonna see that in a minute. Okay, let me just go back this very quickly to see. And so basically, this is a stack with three middlewares. When this finishes, the last line of this middleware has to call the next function, and then it will goes here. And if it doesn't, it will just hang here and stop. It does not finish the response and doesn't do anything either, just hang here. And similarly for this one, when it finish, it needs to call next, and then it will do this. And it can decide not to call next, instead of sending a response back with different message. That's also possible. And in this case, this becomes the last in the middleware stack. So that's what next does. And all you need to do is just call the next method, nothing else. Okay, so now we're going to look at a kind of example, and what we're going to do is do a static file server. So this allows you to send back static files, and including HTML, CSS, and image files, or even MP3 or PDF, any other files. And so to do this, we need to have a folder called a static. So that's basically just a folder where we store all these static files. That's all. And then when the user sends a request, and we're going to check if the file is there. For example, it requests for MP3 files. It will check if inside static we have this file, and if it exists, we're going to send it back. Otherwise, we're going to send an error message saying file not found, and it has a code called 404. That's the common code. Just represent errors with file not missing files. Okay, and then in this particular examples, we can also log the request similar to what we did before as part of the middleware stack. Okay, and so we can have three middleware functions, and the first one will be the logger, just to output the URL to the console on the server. So it's important to know, so this is only happens on the server side. The people requesting the server or say typing localhost 3000 in their browser will not see this. Okay, and the second one will be sending the files, which are sending the static files. So it will check if the file exists in the folder, it will send it. And if the requested file doesn't exist, it will go on to the final one, which is the error handler, so which send back the error message. Okay, so in this case, we have three middleware in the stack, and the first two will be always run, and depends on the outcomes or what happens in the second one, you might send the file back or go to the third middleware and send an error message. excuse me.
As you
And so let me see. Okay, we're gonna setting this up. Then this will be a separate Node.js file. So I'm gonna just Node.js project. So I'm gonna put that in a different folder. So let me do this one now. So this was the first one, which we did the just to show how the simple Express server works. Now I'm gonna just create a different folder now. Make a directory. I'm gonna call this demo static. And I'm gonna go inside this directory. And currently you can see as there's nothing in the directory. Again, the first initialize the folder. And again, so this time I can actually, okay, I probably just still use everything which is default. Okay, and now you can see this file is created the package.json for my project. The one thing different we're going to do, as we shown in the example here, is we're going to say start or have a script property and say start is node app.js. Okay. So what is this does? It tells it what you will run in terms of the start of the entire project. So I already have a script, and instead of using the start and node app.js. Okay, so this is where Node knows how to start your entire app or the server. And so in here, you should put in the command that you need to type in the command line. And so in this case, we'll just call it node app.js if our main file is app.js, and it could be more complex. Okay, and then when you start the entire project, we're gonna using something called npm start. So previously, we always type in say node app.js directly. And currently it will complain because the file doesn't exist yet. But you can also say npm start. So what it does, it will run. Let me go back to the editor. It will run whatever you typed in here under the start of the script part. And you can say node app.js or node server.js and with and some parameters. Okay, just some random things, yeah. And then if you now do npm start, it will try to run it. And obviously it would not understand what this is because it doesn't exist yet. But that saves you from typing this every time you want to start. If you don't use npm start, every time you want to start the server, you have to type these manually in your code on the command line, and can get a bit tedious. Yeah, so that's why there's some benefit of using npm start rather than say using node followed by the actual JavaScript file names you want to run. But obviously there's advantages here. For example, you want to test something else. For example, you have app2.js and it's not in the start script. And you can say node app2.js to start that one. So yeah, and in the sense, this is quite useful. And because when someone else have your code, they probably don't know what are the files to start, or what kind of parameters need to be set, and all they need to run is just to run npm start, and you can run your code without understanding anything because that's already set there. And you can even including multiple commands, so not just one. For example, you need to start up a couple of things to have your app running, and you can do that as well. And finally, it actually allows you to run locally installed command. So you might install a different version of Express, and you want to only use that Express for your project, and you can do that with the npm start script as well. Okay, so this is the setting up. Okay, so currently we still have this empty and folder except and the JSON, and then we need to do npm install Express and save. Okay, and to then install the node file. Okay, and then now if we go back to actually, yeah. So if we go back to here, you can see now it adds the Express dependency. So that's done. That's fine. Okay, and we also, and actually to test this, we need the static folder we mentioned before, and including some files there. So this is one example. We have the static folder with the text files and a couple of pictures. So I'm gonna create, I'm gonna copy, create one as well, and copy some files inside, so we can use that later on when we handling the response. And so I think maybe the easiest is just to copy paste. Okay, and so now I just copied a folder here. Now you can see I now have a folder called static, and I've list. It has like these three files. So we have a HTML file, a picture, and a text file. So these can be the ones we use to handle the response. Not exactly the same as this one, but should work. Okay, and then, okay, and in these examples, we're gonna call our main files, just app.js. So we're gonna just create that. We needed to add a new file called app. JS. Okay, and if I call this app.js, then I need to update the start script here. So it has to be called node app.js. So it knows to app and to run this file, because otherwise it will try to looking for server.js, but it can't find it and give you errors. Okay, so I'm going to start with just the logger middleware, and this is very similar to what we have done before. And in this case, I see using require. Okay, just require all the different packages you need. And as you can see now, we're not using the HTTP module anymore. We're only just using the Express, and which is completely fine. It's including the HTTP module there anyway, so it will be able to set up its own server. So we require the modules, and then we create an instance. We still call it app. Okay, now we come up to our first middleware. We use app.use. That's how you create middleware. And you had a function. Okay, will be request, response, and next. Yeah. So this will create our first middleware. So it has the request object, result, response object, and next. Okay, so this is what we talked about before. You have always the string. Okay, and what it logs is it displays the IP, which is essentially the URL and then date. And the date information you don't get directly from the request. It just say the current date. So that's the same time when the request is sent. So what that does is console.log request IP, and then in this case it's going to be REQ because this is called REQ here. REQ.url, let's do the same, and then console.log. This time will be request time. Instead of getting the information from object, we just use the current time. Okay, so that's our first log, our first middleware, and it's just logged information, log the request URL and the time, and then we're gonna start. Okay, you can see, so this is examples how do you start an HTTP server without using the HTTP module from the node itself. So it's only using Express. Okay, you see app.listen 3000. Okay, so that's the port, and this is the function. It's optional, and you could say just say app.listen 3000, then it will run the server. But you can also put in a function. This will be the function that get run when the server is first started. So in this case, we're putting say console.log. Okay, I can say Express server started. So it's a bit better in the sense now you get a response. Now the server is running. Yeah, and you could get away without this one, just as we did before. Then when you starting the server, you will not see any information on the console. Okay, so if we do this now, we can actually just do that probably easier here and in the inside Visual Studio Code, and you can do the terminal. As I said, we're going to run npm start, and instead of doing node app.js, and this is the equivalent here because in the package.json we say the start script is node.app.js. Okay, I'm going to do the npm start, which is the represented way. Ooh. Oh, got a few errors. Okay. And so in this case, we had errors. And because the address is already in use, that probably means the other demos we did early on is still running. We haven't stopped that yet. Okay, that's in the other window. Okay, so you can see this server is still running, which stopped the new one from starting up. So I need to stop this, and that's stopped. So I can clear. Okay, let's try it again. And npm start. Okay, and you can see here it says an Express server started. Okay, now if I go to the localhost 3000, let's just create a new tab. Localhost 3000, and it should not get any response, but hopefully I should get the console log displayed here on my server console. Yeah, so I can type localhost 3000. You can see, yeah, I got this one now. It says request IP is slash, and that's the time. But if you look at here, you can see the page is kind of loading. There's nothing displayed on here. Yeah. So this certainly is not what we expected or not what it should be. Okay. So the reason is that, go back here and look at our code. The reason being, we started the app, but it doesn't. And because we didn't call next in the middleware. So what it means, okay, this is our middleware. We did some console log, but we didn't use the next. So what will happens is the Express will stop here. It didn't end. It didn't go to the next part either. So it's just hanging there. So that's why this one looks like this. Okay. Okay, so obviously this is quite easy to fix. So you can either, by finish responding to the request, you can using response.end or response.send. This is what we did before. We use this to send a message back to the client. Or you just call the next function. Yeah. So we're gonna do this one because that's the proper way to do it. So we need to do, let me see if I have a code here. Yeah. So all you need to do is just add this to your middleware. So you're typing next. That's it. Okay. Okay. So next thing you need to understand is when you change the code and the server itself does not automatically restart. It's not like the live server in the code. So if we go to here, you can see this page is still loading. And if I starting a new page, still go to the same URL, you can see it has still exactly the same behavior. So what you need to do, you need to stop the server and then restart it. And that way, this will be using the latest change in your code, and then the page will respond properly. Okay, and to start the server you run or the Node.js application, just press Control-C, and which is essentially what this does. Control-C, what this means. And now you can see, and the server is stopped, and it tells me can't be reached and have error. So I'm gonna restart the whole thing again, just typing npm start, and it will say Express server started. And now if I just using the same URL again, and it will have some information like this, and it does not hanging there, and you can see the log still shows the IP and the request time, and because currently the middleware does not return anything, that's why it gets this error message, because it didn't receive any response for the URL we request, which is a root, which is /. That's why I get this message. But at least the page is no longer hanging there anymore. Okay, let's get back to the actual slides. Yeah. So now we're going to build the next middleware in the middleware stack to actually responding something. And before that, we're going to introducing something quickly that allows you to automatically restart your Node.js app whenever there's a change. Okay, so we showed that before. Currently, no, not this one. What you need to do, you first have to stop the current app running and then restart it again with npm start. And this can be a little bit tedious if you keep making changes and you want to see whether the change is working or not. So let me just stop this one first now. It's stopped. So there is, again, a package to help you to do that, and which is called Node More, and it stands for Node More, I think stands for monitor. So it will check if there's any changes. If it detects any new changes, it will automatically restart the app. So it will watch if there's any change. And in a sense, it's like the live server in Visual Studio Code. So when you save, it automatically refreshes the page. Here, once you make a change to your code, it automatically restarts the Node app. Okay, so Node More itself is an external package, and then you can just install it as any other package, like this. Here we have this one, a double dash global. In the sense, this will be installed globally. So all the other Node.js project on your computer, you can automatically using it without having to install it locally. Okay, and once you have that installed, you will change the startup script in your package.json from Node to Node More, and then it will be able to automatically do that whenever it detects a change. Okay, and so I can't remember if I already installed that, but what they're going to do is they're going to just change here. So I'm going to change from Node to Node More, assuming I'm already installed the Node More. So basically that means assuming I already run this already, which I probably did. And then I can run npm start. And if I didn't have Node More, you would have error message here. Here it doesn't. It shows, okay, that's already running. It tells me the server started. And I can go here. I can type in localhost 3000. Okay. But now if I make some changes to my app.js server, add a new log message. This is a new message after Node More is okay, a little bit long, but essentially all it does is just says, okay, I can add an extra message to my server console. Okay, you can see this is a little dot here, so that means it's not saved. As soon as I press save or Command S or Control S, and you can see there's a few lines here. It says restarting due to changes, Express server started, etc., etc. Okay, so now if I refresh this page again, so I don't have to stop and start here. You can see it shows now request IP, the request time, and the new text message I just added. Yeah. Okay, and so that's the Node More, which is external package, allows you to automatically restart the server whenever there's a change, which makes your life a little bit easier. Okay, and now I comment this out, and you can see the server again restarted because it detects a change. And then now it will not display that message anymore. Okay, and this is a recommendation, but you don't have to use it. If you use Node, it will still work. It doesn't change how the code runs or anything like that. Okay, and so the next part is actually to send back the file, depends on what user requested. Okay, so for this, we will need, okay, this is the entire code, but we're gonna explain that bit by bit. So first, you need a couple of new packages that you need. One is called path, and the other one is called file system. So both of these are included in the node, so you don't have to install them. You can directly just use them. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to define something called the path, which is just the path module. The other one called file system, which is stands for FS stands for FS. Okay, and then we can start using path and FS. Okay, so this will be, as I said, this will be the second middleware in our Express app. So I'm going to close this now. So it's important we put the code after this first. And the starting will be the same, and you do a function, and it has a request, response, and next object. And this is where you're actually putting in the code that you will do, what happens. Okay, and the first line is you're going to be using the pass.join function. This allows you to join these things together. So this will be the static directory name. In this case, will be /static. Sorry. And this says it's going to do the directory name. In this case, it's going to be static, and then followed by the request URL. Okay, and here the reason you are using pass.join instead of just static and say concatenated or joined by the request URL is, and sometimes some of the system would use this when they send in the request, or the other way of the slash when they send in the request. And then this, if you're using pass.join, it will automatically figure out which slash to use correctly. So that's why we're using the pass.join. Okay. So what it does is it just it add /static to the beginning of before the URL the user typed in. If we can see here, oops. How do you show the, okay. So when you just type in a single, just type in the localhost 3000, you can see the URL here is just /. But if you type in something localhost / and index.html, and currently it doesn't work because we don't have that file yet, you can see now the return the URL would be /index.html. And when you do this, it will add static in front of /.index.html. So we'll get the pass, which is static /index.html, which is what we needed to find the file. So we're going to do file pass equal to pass join dir name static, and so request.url. Okay. So basically, this line gives you the correct path, so you can find the file to return. Okay, and if the user typed in Selenium.mp3, and this will be like this. And finally, they generated the file path, which is this one, including whatever the file path here, static, and Selenium.mp3. Yes. Okay, so the dir name also add these parts if they need it. So when your files on your computer, you would have a path to a directory, and that will change when it's moved on to a server, and then this dir name can automatically add this for you. Okay, and the next part is actually to find the file or serve the file. So we're going to use this stat function from the FS, the file system, which is already requested here. And it takes in a file path and then a function as the input. So this one is the files that you want to return. And the second function is, say, if there's something happened, error happened, what it would do. Okay. And so if there's error message, the error information will be inside the error object. And if there's no error, the file is actually found, and that information will be stored in this object. Okay, and in this case, we're going to just use this particular method to check if the actual file existed or not. Okay, and so just go back to the code. So now, once we had file pass, we're going to use file pass as one of the inputs, and in terms of the output, which is the function, it will be either an error object or a file info object if the file is found. Yeah. Okay. And then we say, then depends on the input. We then say, if the file exists, send the file, which is what this part does. So we say if file info, so that's the information about the file, which is dot is file, dot is file. What we're going to do is res dot send file pass. Okay, and so first thing you can see, I didn't use a curly bracket here after the if, because if it was only one line command, you don't need curly bracket. Okay, and this thing is a response, and when it called send file, it will send file back. The file pass will be whatever we already decided here. So that will end as the response. So it will, how do I say, and stop the handler function. And if this is not the case, we'll say else, and then we're going to go to the next middleware, just calling next. Okay. So now I assume the node mode has been updating, keep restarting as I make changes. So if I now do localhost 3000, still can't find it. But if we look at our static directory, we have index.html. So if I type in /index.html, okay, so it actually hopefully returns the index page. Or I can type in the other thing is called secret text. Oh, secret.text. Oh, it does not. Ah, C slash. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. And so part of the reason here clashed is if you can look at here, and it tells you the, where was that? Node app crashed, and it's because there's some error in your code, and it can't find secret. So we just need to restart this. And if I type in slash, what's the other, matlab.png. Okay, so that also worked. So here I request a file called matlab.png, and the server
It's crashed again.
Even it served the file correctly and then it crashed again. That's interesting. Okay, we might not have time to resolve that yet. Potentially because we just haven't run the, how do I say, the error handler yet. Okay, so this will be the last part, which is just the error handler. So if something unexpected happens, so this is what the next should do. Okay, and so again, so it's an app.use. That means I'm going to create another middleware. I'll call this a function. I only have the request and response because I know this is going to be the last middleware. I'm not going to have anything more. And so this setting the error code because I know, and the only situation when I get to here is because the file can't find. So that will be the error code. And then say I'm going to send a message. So this will end the response as well. Say file not found. Okay, let's see. So again, this should be restarting already. And if I come here, I type localhost 3000. Okay. Can. Okay. Now it gives you the error. It can't find the file. Did I miss something? Still get me the crash information there. Yeah, that's the end of it now. Did I miss something? File info dot. Okay. And so in the examples we have, it checks for error first, but it shouldn't. And okay, I probably need a bit more time to figure out exactly what's wrong here, and we're running out of time now. So that's everything for today. And so we showed you the examples of the middleware stack. And the things I will just repeat again, the order of the middleware is important. So in this case, we're going to do the log first, and then do the file path, and finally do the error handler. So this is how the way or the order the stack will be run. If you change that, say for example, if you move that to the first, and this will always be run first and end the entire middleware stack, which is probably not what you wanted for most of the servers. Okay, and in terms of reading, so that will be the chapter 2 of the book. So the same book, and we now move on to the chapter 2 now. Okay, and that's it for today. I'm going to stop the recording now, if I can find the control.
See you next week, Kai.
Yeah, see you next week.